What does your top 5 ballot look like?
My top 5 ballot, the back end was really hard. Really, the whole thing was hard this early in the season because, as mentioned at the top, it's difficult to know how much team success should matter at this point when we haven't really even reached that stabilization point around 20 games in a season. So, I wanted to give a lot of shout outs to honorable mention candidates. John Morant, who has been so important, Giannis, who I think has to be docked for the lack of team success at this point, even if it can reasonably be explained away by, as you put it, the skeleton crew around him. DeMar DeRozan deserves some love. Luka Doncic coming off the buzzer-beating 3 against the Boston Celtics as we record this. Like he needs to be in the conversation. But I do have Rudy Gobert at number 5. Just a defensive system unto himself, continuing to show more growth on offense. He's never going to be this game-changing scoring presence, but the ability to thrive within his role, to demand defensive attention that makes things easier on the perimeter players matters a ton for a Jazz team that has still only lost 2 games. Jokic at number 4. You can cite that 35-plus point net rating swing.
Wait,
You shouldn't.
can I interrupt to go? How did you go from mentioning him as an honorable mention in Defensive Player of the Year to putting him outside the top 3 on the MVP ballot? If Jokic deserves an honorable mention,
I've already rescinded that though.
Okay.
No, it's because like the team success element matters here, where the Nuggets are only 5-4 as we're recording this, and they've been disappointing. They have the excuse of Jamal Murray not being there. They have the excuse of Michael Porter Jr. forgetting to show up for the season, and Jokic has been utterly phenomenal. But I do think that if we're ranking MVP cases, like if you're asking me who has been the best player in the league, that's a different question. And Jokic is going to be one of the top 2 in that conversation. But still, like the MVP criteria typically includes some element of team success. And it's hard, but at this time of year, like when the Nuggets are just barely above 500, I think that has to detract from his case, even if he has 100% crushed it in his minutes.
Yeah, it's interesting how differently we approach this because if I was doing predictive, maybe I would have something different. But we're also so early that if you're above 500, you haven't had Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr.'s was injured on Saturday, but has been playing like butt or shooting like butt, I should say, for most of the season. And the fact that they're, can you like the Nuggets are 5-4? They're 5-4 because of how demonstrably they've lost the minutes with Jokic off the floor. And I think they're plus 13.3 points per 100 possessions with him on the court this year.
But then let's compare that to my number 3, which is Kevin Durant, where the Nets, as we're recording this, are 6-3. They haven't had Kyrie Irving because Kyrie Irving's an idiot. James Harden has been struggling to figure out his offensive role in an NBA that isn't going to reward his flailing with foul calls. The rest of the team is comprised of veteran pieces who have either diminishing effectiveness or questionable fits within the lineup, and he has just been absolutely fantastic. So I think the cases there are pretty similar, except the losses that the Nets have suffered are bigger and more unexpected. So for him to float this team to where it is, I think matters more at this early stage of the season.
I think the other thing here that's ridiculous on my part is that the names that are on this list are so eminently interchangeable right now. And that was more so just I couldn't believe you tried to make the fringe DPOY case for Jokic before. That is, I guess in my head, regardless of who's in front of him, if you were to say you've rescinded it, it's fine, like whatever. But if you were to say that he even deserved like a cursory glance in the defensive player of the year discussion, he's already probably the best, one of the 2 or 3 best at worst offensive players in basketball.
Right. No, and I think like for full disclosure, I was basing that argument a lot off a tweet from the B-Ball Index where Jokic was 5th among players who had played 100 plus minutes in their adjusted rim points saved per 75 possessions. That was from November 1st. So in the 6 days that have followed, like the Nuggets have suffered 2 losses to the Grizzlies, and his standing in that metric has fallen significantly, which should have eliminated him from that conversation. And I did not do so. And I was just flat out wrong. So that, I don't think that I can square that one with having him 4th if that's the case, but we're moving past that. So, but yeah, I mean, like a lot of these names are fully interchangeable. So I do have Jokic at 4. I have KD at number 3. I have Steph at number 2. The shooting numbers still aren't where we want them to be, where he's forced us to expect them to be, but he is just faced with so much defensive attention on a nightly basis and has these Warriors still just absolutely rolling with, you know, the roster still isn't like that eminently talented where, I don't think we're suddenly going to see a complete star turn from Andrew Wiggins. We're going to see Jordan Poole develop into an all-star or anything. Like, this is still the Steph show, even if there are supporting pieces. And he's just been fantastic. And I do have Jimmy Butler at number 1 because the Heat, I think, have been the best team in basketball to this point. He's the number 1 player on it. I've covered what I think of his defense while having him at number 1 in my Defensive Player of the Year rankings. But his offense really has not lagged too far behind that defensive effort. At the time of recording, he's averaging 24.7 points, 5.2 assists, only 2.2 turnovers per game. He has cut back on the three-pointers that he's taken, which were already pretty minimal to begin with, in favor of generating even more free throw attempts, even more shots around the basket. He's been fantastic pulling up from mid-range zones and floater territory. He's been a more aggressive scorer in all the ways that are suited to him absolutely thriving. I think the counter argument here is that of these teams that have legitimate MVP candidates, he has the most players propping him up because Bam Adebayo is obviously so impactful. Kyle Lowry matters so much. Tyler Hero has been so fantastic off the bench. But to this point, Butler has probably been the most effective two-way player in the NBA for what might be the best team in the NBA.
Yeah, so I can breeze through mine because we had almost the same ballot. I had Giannis on mine, and so here's my case for Giannis. I think he's shooting well enough on, I think it's like 31+% right now from 3. That's fine with me. Upped his free throw percentage, still a monster on defense. And just like Drew Holiday recently, he has 1 game under his belt as we're recording this. He played like 20 minutes in their loss to the Knicks on Friday night. The Bucks are still, when Giannis is playing without Drew, without Brook Lopez, and without Chris Middleton, outscoring opponents by 9.3 points per 100 possessions. Now, you could argue that that would mostly just be bench units, except for the fact that this season, particularly the non-Drew, non-Brook Lopez minutes, those have not been just bench minutes. They also don't have Dante DiVincenzo. Bobby Portis has missed some time. The Bucks have not looked great, but that they're hovering around 500, I have Giannis for. And I just think that that's why. And there's more, because I'm not making this predictive, I obviously have more leeway. But even if we were, I think because it's so early, where like records can still have the ability to change, where if you're near 500, you go on 1 winning streak, you're all of a sudden like 6, 7 games above 500. I think he deserves more love for the season. Like the Bucks have just been like decimated this year, low key decimated, and he's still been amazing. My number 5 guy was Stephen Curry. He's been great. Just the way defenses still bend to what he's doing. Look, the Warriors' offense is still so bad with him off the floor. Like, it's a little bit harder probably to stagger him and Jordan Poole with Jordan Poole starting, but Jordan Poole still logged the majority of those minutes without Steph, and the offense is just awful. I think Golden State's defense has like been its larger identity this season, and that's not, splitting hairs. Am I detracting from him for that? Sure. Is he still the type of guy that could lead the league in scoring on otherworldly efficiency while not being like this just living at the rim guy? He's taking these difficult 3-pointers. Sure, he absolutely can be. If you want to pick him because you're saying, hey, best player from the second best team in the league or the third best, like if it gets to a point where you just want to default to best player on the best team, Steph is going to be right in here. So is Jimmy Butler. Those would probably be the 2 that I think fit that criteria. You had Rudy Gobert on yours. I did not have Rudy Gobert on mine. Kevin Durant, I had at number 3. Maybe I'm like reading too much into the Nets' as just overarching offensive struggles, and it's not on him. They've been more reliant on him than ever. And the fact that they've evaded complete disaster, and you could probably just argue that this is complete disaster based off James Harden, whether he's injured, out of shape, adjusting to the rules, some combination of all 3. He did mention that hamstring injury. To still be 4th in the East this early in the season at 6-3, absolutely huge deal. I think Kevin Durant's been very good on defense. The top 3 that I have here, it was just tough for me to delineate. I went with Jimmy Butler at number 2. I don't feel great about it. And for both ways. I feel like Kevin Durant should be ahead of him, but I also feel like Jimmy Butler should be number 1, if that makes any sense. so important with the rim pressure he puts on. And I think the fact that he has not really been impacted by these new officiating rules shows what like kind of a brute force that he always was. Like it was more of this organic rim pressure. He was not some off Broadway, play actor. And then you have someone who's so important to you, what you're doing defensively. At the same time, you mentioned already, you have Kyle Lowry, missed some time, obviously, but you also have Bam around you. And then on offense, like you do, Duncan Robinson hasn't been great this year, but like you've had Tyler Hero in addition to Bam and Kyle Lowry. So that was tough. I went with Jokic, and I think this is going to surprise some people because the Nuggets haven't been great. Again, I would point to you plus 13.8 when he's on the court this year. That is a monster net rating. The other thing is that when you look at his numbers, he's playing, the raw numbers don't stand out as much as last year. He's playing fewer minutes. So when you go to his per 36 minutes, he's averaging more points per 36 minutes. Your favorite stat, rebounds, the tell-all. I'm really just busting your balls here. More rebounds per 36 minutes. He's averaging more steals per 36 minutes, more blocks per 36 minutes. His assists are down. And I think that's going to get a lot of people, like, that's the argument they're going to use to detract from it. His true shooting percentage, by the way, is up. His usage is up because he has to score more for this offense to function. And I want to make an important point here about his assist, though. This isn't the perfect way to do it, but last year, Jokic had 599 assists on 996 potential assists. So correct me if I'm wrong here, of the shots that players essentially shot when it was an assist opportunity for Jokic, above 60% in those situations. This year, he has 47 assists on 101 potential assists. That is below 47%. That is a monster drop-off. Now, you could argue then that he was blessed with having a Jamal Murray, having Michael Porter Jr. have one of the most efficient seasons in history. Okay, great, grand. The Nuggets are still dominating, by and large, the minutes he's on the court without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr. shooting well, he's surrounded by bench players who, for the most part, just really aren't like creators. I would argue, given the context of this season, there's our favorite word, I am more impressed by what Nikola Jokic is doing right now than I am by what he was doing for most of last season. And
sure, I think that's totally reasonable.
I have him at number one. You'd be hard pressed to convince me that he is not the best player in basketball right now. At the same time, if you told me, and you already did, that you had Jimmy Butler on or you had Kevin Durant on, I'd probably just shrug and be like, you know what, you're probably right. So it's so early, but I think we need to recognize how difficult the circumstances are for Jokic right now. They're not dissimilar to what Kevin Durant is going through. The flip side is that you got to pick one side of the fence. Is James Harden this consensus top 5, top 10 player or not? Jokic doesn't even have that if the Nuggets are at full strength, which they're not without Jamal Murray. And Michael Porter Jr., no, he was not a wild card. He did just get what amounts to a max extension. But like, we were still wondering whether there was more depth, like more self-creation to his offensive game. They haven't really put him in a ton of those situations this season. He's going through whatever. I imagine he'll get better. It's going to be wild that Jokic's MVP case might get stronger if Michael Porter Jr. gets better, who's missing shots this year that he was just hitting last year. That's probably an oversimplification of his struggles prior to his injury, but that's just where I'm at. And so like, that's a huge drop-off. You're going from guys shooting 60% in your assist opportunity situations to 46.9% or whatever it is. And
go ahead.
The last thing I'm going to say is Michael Malone even kind of said it. Nikola Jokic is averaging 3 fewer minutes per game than he was last year. And he mentioned that he's worried that they're riding him too hard because he's even more important to the offense. And now you're coming off a season that was coming off the shortest offseason in sports history where you made a deep playoff run. And then you made another, we'll call it a semi-deep playoff run because they got trucked by Phoenix in the semifinals. But you still made it past the first round, which is something the fullest strength Blazers couldn't do. So again, I'm not saying that this is gospel. You can pick someone else, and you did, and I think Butler and Durant should be one. Everyone gets a trophy in my book, apparently. I've turned into one of those. But I
agree with you, though. Like, I think that any of Butler, Curry, Durant, and Jokic could reasonably be number one here.
And look, with Curry, it's just like if you think the Warriors are the second best team in the league or the first, like that's not his only argument, but he has that. Whereas right now, Durant, Jokic, and well, I guess Butler does have like if you think that the Heat are the best team in the league. So, but like Durant and Jokic don't have that argument right now because of how their teams have fared.
Right.